Okay, guys. Um, I'm gonna get started here once this is up. So this is your first YouTube class with me. It doesn't always go perfectly, but I'm hoping that we don't have any hiccups. Hopefully my sound is good for you guys. I'll make sure it's like definitely listenable before I post this. But how this is going to work is I'm just going to go over some basics of what to expect from this. I will go through the lecture and then you will end the video and go complete writing project number 3. So a couple reminders for you. One, before you begin this video, so if you haven't already, you're going to want to pause the video and make sure that you have read over writing project 1, the response paper assignment sheet. We'll have gone over it in class, but it might be good for you to review it, especially because you will need to have selected a text from the listed text on the assignment sheet. So when I say text, I just mean any of like the essays or chapters or articles listed on that assignment sheet. That's whenever I use the word text, I'm just referring to the essay that you picked for this assignment. So just to remind you, you're picking one of those texts, one of those essays, and you are writing a 2 to 3 page paper in response to it, where you take some kind of stance and say that you agreed or disagreed with the points being made. You can do both within the paper. You can agree with some points and disagree with some points. We'll talk about how you navigate that a little bit more in this video today. This video is going to guide you through just starting writing on this paper. So you need to have made sure you selected a text and that you've carefully read through it so you know what you want to say about it. 2, as you watch, it's going to be really helpful for you to have writing journal number 3 open and available so that you can pause this video and write as you watch. This is going to save you a lot of time. There will be different points where I'll say, and you're going to write this in writing journal 3, and it will be really nice for you to just pause the video, go write that portion, come back to the video. So again, right now you're going to want to pause this video, open writing journal number 3, read through it to make sure you know what's going on, and then come back. Okay, so today's goal is for you to first learn how to write an introduction. Now, I don't want to say introduction paragraph. In the past, you may have learned when you're writing shorter essays that your introduction needs to be a single paragraph. That will probably be true for this paper because you're writing a shorter paper, but it's not necessarily true in college level writing that your introduction is a single paragraph. So I just wanted to clarify why I'm just saying introduction and not introduction paragraph. So first thing we're going to do today is learn how to write an introduction to a response paper, which is the type of paper you are writing or the genre in which you are writing. There are 4 steps that I would like you to follow. Now, you don't have to write every introduction for the rest of your life this way. I am just taking the approach that you are learning how to write right now, and so I'm going to give you a little bit more structure. You don't necessarily have to ultimately follow this structure, but I want you to practice writing an introduction paragraph this way. Step 1 is a hook. You need some way of getting the attention of your audience or drawing their interest. And I'm just briefly going over these steps. We'll go into detail later. 2, you need some basic background. What is the text you are responding to? Who wrote it? What is it about? Just briefly describe and give us some background on the article or the text you are responding to. Now, beyond this basic background, you don't really need to explain too much about your text. You can kind of write with the assumption that your audience has already read the same text as you. You don't need to go into too much detail, but in an intro paragraph, it's good just to give some basic background, remind us what you're talking about. Step 3, you want some basic personal thoughts. Briefly cover the range of thoughts you have on the text, on the specific text you're analyzing. Again, this just kind of reminds us or introduces us to your ideas without going into too much detail. It's kind of like when you read the plot summary of a movie before you go see it. You just want a little bit of an idea of what you're going to get from a movie before you actually sit down and watch it. It's the same thing here. 4, you need a thesis. Overall, you need to tell us what is your opinion on this text, and this should be expressed as an opinion, right? So you need to take some kind of stance. Overall, I thought this text effectively persuaded their audience of blank, or overall, I don't think this essay achieved its goals. So you need to have some kind of opinion of overall, basically, I liked it or I didn't like it, or it did a good job or it didn't do a good job. It can be as simple as any of those things. Now, I know you're familiar with the term thesis or a thesis statement, or you should be familiar with it. But just a reminder, a thesis statement is just kind of like the main goal of your essay. And so in this part, you're going to want to make it really clear to your audience that this is what they can expect from your paper. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So we're going to break these steps down. Step 1 is a hook. Now, the first goal of a hook, of an opening line of a paper, is to avoid cliches. Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how many papers I have read that have started with something like, since the beginning of time, or in our modern society. Now, not only are these phrases boring, and I've heard them a million times, but they're just not really specific. You're not really doing anything with those statements. They're not really saying anything. First of all, you're writing a 2-page paper and you're starting at the beginning of time. That seems a little bit far back to go for your 2 pages. Second of all, it doesn't indicate to us in any way what your paper is going to be about. I want a really interesting, specific thing in the first line of your paper. Now, you don't have to put too much pressure on this. Really, the goal is that you just say something very specific to what you are talking about. If you are talking about native languages, say something about native languages. Don't talk about our modern society as a whole. The second rule of a hook is you should use vivid language and imagery. There should be some kind of image or something that we can grab onto as a reader and picture in our minds. 3, it appeals to pathos. Now, if you remember, pathos is emotion. This doesn't mean that your opening line has to make me cry or laugh or anything like that, but it should connect to some kind of emotion, or I should, feel a little bit of something about what you're saying. Now, and it should be brief, 1 or 2 sentences. You don't need a full paragraph story to draw your reader's attention. In fact, that can be really distracting. So, I have some examples here. Now, this example comes from a former student's paper, okay? So I'm not saying that this example is like the most perfect intro paragraph you've ever read, but it's pretty good and it accomplishes the goals. So this student was writing a response paper to an essay called How I Came to Love the Veil. It's by a woman named Yvonne Ridley. So this was their hook. This was their opening line. Americans, as a whole, have often been accused of prejudice against the Muslim community, particularly after 9/11. Now, if you don't know anything else about this paper and you're just coming to this is interesting, it's specific, it has some emotion attached to it, and it has, some vivid language and some imagery attached to it. You can picture what they're talking about as part of the audience of this paper. It's a pretty good hook. Okay, so step 2 is then you want some basic background. Here's where you want to step away from that vivid language, that imagery, and use really plain language. Whenever we're giving background or just basic information, you want to be really clear. You don't need to be really flowery here. We don't need any of that narrator, overly clever language. Just be really simple and straightforward. In fact, good writing often is just simple and straightforward. Here's where you want to name the author and the title of the article or the text that you are responding to. 3, you want to clearly or clearly state the rhetorical situation of the article, including the intended argument. So here's where you want to say, you've already named the author, you want to say, here's who I think this author was trying to convince, and here's what I think their point was. Here's what I think their main goal was. So, back to my student example, my student said, in Yvonne Ridley's essay, How I Came to Love the Veil, she speaks against this prejudice, meaning the prejudice against Muslims, and explains why, in her opinion, Americans are hypocritical in their prejudice. Now, this student didn't do like a super good job at explaining who the audience of her paper was. She kind of does that a little bit later in her intro, but or the audience of Yvonne Ridley's essay, but she does a really good job of explaining what she thinks Yvonne Ridley's goal was. She thinks her goal was to explain why Americans are hypocritical in their prejudice. So she makes that pretty clear. Step 3, basic personal thoughts. So after you've said, here's the article I'm going to respond to, here's what I think they're trying to do, just give us like a little bit of simple, like almost like a hint or a teaser about what your thoughts on this essay were. Overall, how did you feel about it? Was it successful? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Don't go into details. We're going to get the details later in the paper. That's the whole point of this paper. But we just, again, it's like the movie example. You want to have seen a trailer or read a little bit about the plot before you actually go to a movie so you can kind of know what to expect. You want to make it clear without being overly critical or acting superior. Now, this is a really tricky thing to do. If you didn't like an essay that you read, this point in your paper is not the place to just like dump on the author and just like tear them apart, okay? This can be kind of off-putting to a reader, especially early in the paper when they don't have a lot of context for it. So don't be super overly critical or act like you know so much more than the author. Just make it really clear. You know what? I didn't like certain aspects of this paper, or I don't think this essay accomplished its goals. Again, you want to use clear language and be really specific. So back to our example. Here's what our student goes on to say. She says, while I can agree with Ridley that many Americans need to educate themselves on the Muslim religion beyond what they see from biased news sources, I think her essay is overly critical of American culture, and at times she is hypocritical herself. Okay, so we have just a basic idea of what this student is going to say in response to Yvonne Ridley's essay. We can see that she can agree with certain parts of what she's saying, but overall, she doesn't think that Yvonne Ridley achieved her goals. Which takes us to step 4, which is your thesis statement. Now again, your thesis statement should just kind of be your main takeaway. So you're going to go over parts in your paper where you'll say, you know what, I agree with things this author said, I disagree with things this author said. Here's where you just say, overall, it was pretty good, or overall, it wasn't good, overall, it achieved its goals, overall, it did not achieve its goals. And again, you want to use language that indicates you're about to state your main thought or your main opinion so that your reader is really clear that this is your thesis, this is happening. I like the word overall, but you can use any term or language that makes that clear, that the next thing you're about to say is like a summary of your big opinion. Be as clear and concise as possible, clearly state your overall opinion, but still leave room to both agree or disagree with certain parts of the text. Definitely don't say in your thesis statement, nothing about this essay was redeemable, or this essay was perfect, it perfectly accomplished its goal, because that doesn't leave any room for you to then agree or disagree with other parts of the text, which I would like you to do in this essay. So here's our thesis statement example. Overall, I think Ridley comes up short with her intended goal of convincing ignorant Americans to show less prejudice towards the Muslim community. While some of her points are interesting and helpful, okay, good, so we're leaving the door open there to point out good and interesting parts that we agreed with in the essay. She makes too many choices that alienate her audience to be convincing. We're clear that overall this author didn't love the essay, but there's still space for her to go and point out positive parts of it. This is a really good, solid thesis statement. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken those 4 parts, this student example, and put it together in the actual intro paragraph for you. So she just wrote her intro in 1 paragraph here. As you can tell, it's not super long, but it covers all her bases. When a reader finishes reading this paragraph, they're really aware of what essay she's analyzing, the basics of what that essay talks about, how the author of this essay feels about Yvonne Ridley's essay, and just overall what was her opinion of it. Okay, so now we're ready to jump into body paragraphs and get more information on what was good and bad about this essay. So right now is a really good time for you to pause this video, read over this paragraph, and then go over to Writing Journal 3 and write your own intro paragraph using these steps. Now, once you have done that, it's time for you to jump in to body paragraphs for this paper. Now, I just want to remind you of something, or maybe teach you something if you didn't realize this. Most of you will have written 5-paragraph essays in high school, and in fact, some of you, this is all you have ever written. This is just not the kind of essay. You actually probably will never write another 5-paragraph essay again, which might be discouraging to those of you who really perfected that craft. You'll definitely take the skills and the tools you learned in writing that 5-paragraph essay and apply it to other papers, but there's just no more paragraph number requirements, okay? So you just want enough paragraphs to fulfill my page requirements and accomplish your goals. With that being said, we're just going to jump into talking about what belongs in your body paragraphs. So you've written an intro paragraph, and now you're ready to fill the body of your paper. There's some good rules to follow when you're preparing to write a body paragraph. The first one is that paragraphs should stay on topic and, when possible, connect to or support your thesis. So every paragraph should have one main idea, and the whole paragraph should stay on topic. And when possible, that topic should connect to or support your thesis. And when I say when possible, I mean that all the paragraphs should contribute to the paper as a whole, and it should be really clear in most paragraphs how that specific paragraph connects to or supports the thesis statement of yours. 2, a body paragraph should be long enough to make a point and not so long that it bores the reader. Otherwise, there are no length rules or sentence requirements for a paragraph. This is another rule you might have learned in high school. You might have learned a paragraph is 5 to 7 sentences, or 4 to 6, or 8 to 10. I hear all sorts of numbers all the time, but none of them are real rules, right? Just the main rule is it should be long enough that your whole point is made, but not so long that it becomes boring. Otherwise, no length rules. 3, all paragraphs should include either a direct quote from the original text. Now this applies specifically to writing response papers. This isn't every paragraph you'll ever write, but in a response paper, your paragraph should include a direct quote from the original text or a specific story that is image-based and interesting to the reader. We'll get into this a little more in a second, but basically a paragraph full of just your thoughts and opinions for a whole paragraph can get really boring and dry to a reader. You want to make sure that you're mixing it up with a quote from the text and that you're responding to that quote, or a story, maybe a personal story that relates or helps you make a point, or some kind of image or other story from an outside source that you're bringing in to maintain interest. Now, before you begin to write your body paragraphs, for this paper, it's a really good idea that you kind of outline the text's the quotes or the passages that you want to respond to and talk about. That's going to help um, how many of your paragraphs agree with points in the paper, how many disagree. You can kind of decide how you want to organize all of that, if you want them to build on each other. So, before you actually start writing your body paragraphs, again, I'm going to ask you to pause this video and go make a list of passages or quotes from the text you are responding to that you feel strongly about, either you agree or disagree with. So that's a good place to start with the body of this paper, is just pulling quotes out. There's a spot in Writing Journal 3 for you to make a list of quotes and maybe some ideas or thoughts that you have about each of those quotes. So once you have done that, you're going to jump into writing your actual body paragraphs. Now, the first thing you need to know about a body paragraph is that every paragraph needs a topic sentence. A topic sentence is kind of like a mini thesis statement for your paragraph. Unlike a thesis statement where it can kind of come anywhere in your introduction, a topic sentence needs to be the first sentence of every paragraph. We need to kind of know what that paragraph is going to be about. So the first sentence of every paragraph, and now obviously there's exceptions to these rules, but I'm teaching you how to write a good standard paragraph. The topic sentence, or the first sentence of every paragraph, should just introduce the main point of that paragraph. And then the rest of the paragraph should just be spent illustrating that point that the topic sentence is making. Now, if you're wanting to write a really basic paragraph format, now please don't take this to mean that I'm saying every paragraph you write for this paper should follow this format. But this is kind of the most basic of paragraph formats, and if you're struggling with how to organize or what belongs in a paragraph, this is a good place to start. And in fact, I'm going to have you write a practice paragraph like this. So this is called a topic illustration explanation paragraph. And it goes like this. You start with a topic sentence. So again, this is a student example. Now, this student example, like I said, it's not perfect, and all the opinions in this are just from the student, so I want you to kind of ignore that and just focus on the conventions of what this student is doing. So, one of the biggest examples of Ridley speaking hypocritically comes when she tries to convince Western women to not judge Muslim women by talking about how Muslim women judge Western women. Now, even though that's a little bit wordy of a sentence, it does introduce the topic of the paragraph. We know that this paragraph is going to be about Ridley speaking hypocritically about Western women and Muslim women. Now, we have our topic. We know what this paragraph is going to be about. The next thing we need to do is illustrate the point. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that. The easiest way is to just directly quote the text. Give an example directly from the text of what you're talking about. Another way would be to maybe bring in a story, a personal story, or a story from an outside source to illustrate your point. But especially for this paper, just direct quotes from the text are going to be a great way to illustrate your point. You're saying something happens in the text you're reading, and then just show us that it's happening. So, here we go. Our author directly quotes the text. She says, so our author uses the phrase she says to introduce her quote, and then she just directly quotes the text. And I won't read that whole quote to you, but you can see that there's quotation marks, there's a page number, everything. It's clear that this is a direct quote from the text. Now, the last part of this paragraph is an explanation. So you've introduced the topic, you've given us an example, and now you need to explain your point. Okay, so our author says, Ridley seems like she thinks she's proving a point about how Islamic women shouldn't be judged. In reality, though, she's only proving that women everywhere judge other women. Earlier in the paragraph, she even talks about how her friends couldn't stop laughing at a bikini in a beauty pageant. It's unclear how pointing this out supports her overall goal of convincing Americans to stop being prejudiced towards Muslims. So, notice that the majority of this paragraph is our author's own words. She's sharing a lot of her thoughts and opinions about the quote that she just illustrated. Make sure the majority of your paragraphs come from your own opinions and thoughts. If like most of your paper is huge block quotes and I get very little of your own opinions, that's not going to bode well in terms of how I can score your paper, because it's really hard for me to score your opinions and your thoughts and your writing if it's not there. So here's what you want to do. Head back to writing project 3. If you haven't already, start at the beginning with an intro paragraph and an outline. But if you've already done those 2 parts, the last step is to go and write a paragraph using this basic format: topic, illustration, explanation. Practice writing a body paragraph. Now, like I said, every paragraph you write for this paper won't follow that format, but it is a good structure to follow, and it's good to practice. So you're going to go ahead and do those 3 sections of the paper, and at that point, you should feel really confident that you're kind of on your way with this paper and that you're ready to move into just continuing to write, continuing to edit and revise. As always, you're welcome to email me or contact me with any questions or concerns that you have. I appreciate you listening, and I hope that you guys are having a good day.